My father's coffin was still hanging above the open grave when Lydia Bennet decided I should lose him twice. The lowering straps hummed under the weight of polished walnut, a low mechanical sound that traveled through the wet October air and settled in my teeth. 43 relatives stood around the plot at Magnolia Rest Cemetery in Greenville, South Carolina, pretending the cold wasn't bothering them and pretending grief made people holy. The grass smelled like rain, cut stems, and the raw clay the groundskeepers had stacked beside the hole. Then Lydia stepped forward. She wore a black cashmere coat with pearl buttons, sunglasses too large for her narrow face, and the calm expression of a woman who had rehearsed her devastation in front of a mirror. Her son Chase stood beside her with his hands folded over his belt buckle, tall, handsome, useless, and satisfied. When she lifted one gloved hand and pointed at me, even the minister stopped breathing for a second. "Before we bury Elliot," she said, "this family deserves the truth about Mara." My name sounded wrong in her mouth. I was 32 years old, wearing my father's old navy scarf under a thrift store black coat because I had forgotten my good one at the hospital. I had spent the last 4 nights answering calls from store managers, signing death certificates, choosing hymns, and explaining to my father's oldest employees why the man who knew every customer by name was not walking through the door again. I had not slept more than 9 hours total. I was not ready for theater. Lydia opened a cream-colored folder and turned so everyone could see the lab logo on the first page. "Elliot Bennet was type O negative," she said. "Mara is AB positive. Anyone with basic biology knows what that means. She is not Elliot's biological child." The gasp moved through my father's family like wind through dry leaves. My Aunt Ruth pressed one hand to her chest. My cousin Daniel whispered, "What?" Someone behind me dropped a paper program into the mud. The minister lowered his Bible slowly, as if scripture had suddenly become too heavy. Lydia kept going because people like Lydia don't stop when they draw blood. "For 32 years," she said, her voice soft and vicious, "this woman has benefited from a lie. She inserted herself into a legacy that belongs to Elliot's real family, to his widow, to his son." Chase looked at me and smiled with only one side of his mouth. "Sorry, Mara," he said. "Guess all those Sunday dinners didn't make you legitimate." The word legitimate landed harder than I expected. I looked down at the coffin and saw the spray of white roses shaking slightly in the wind. My father had hated white roses because he said they looked like hotel lobby flowers, but Lydia had ordered them anyway because expensive grief photographs better. I remember thinking, absurdly, that if Dad could sit up just once, he would complain about the flowers before he complained about being dead. Then Mr. Jonah Reed cleared his throat. He had been standing by the cedar tree, gray overcoat buttoned, leather briefcase in his left hand, expression calm enough to make the cemetery seem loud. Jonah Reed had been my father's attorney for 26 years and my unofficial uncle for most of my life. He had reviewed my first apartment lease, attended my college graduation, and once drove 3 hours to pick me up when my car died outside Asheville. "Mrs. Bennet," he said. Lydia's eyes flicked toward him. "If you are finished conducting a probate hearing in front of an open grave," he continued, "Mr. Bennet left instructions for precisely this circumstance." The wind stopped. Maybe it didn't, but it felt that way. Jonah walked forward with the kind of careful steps people take when they already know where the bodies are buried. From his briefcase, he removed a sealed manila envelope, thick, yellow, and covered across the front in my father's square handwriting. I saw my name before I saw anything else. "For Mara, my daughter. Open publicly if Lydia attacks her place in this family." My throat closed. Lydia laughed once. It was a small, brittle sound. "This is ridiculous." "No," Jonah said. "This is notarized." He broke the seal. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the lowering machine clicking softly behind the funeral director and the distant hiss of tires on Rutherford Road. Jonah unfolded 3 pages, put on his reading glasses, and began with the sentence my father had clearly wanted me to hear first. "My Mara was mine before she had a name." My knees nearly failed. Jonah read in a voice steady enough to hold me upright. My father wrote that he had known the truth about biology since before I was born, that my mother, Ellen, had told him everything when she was 3 months pregnant and terrified he would leave. He wrote that he signed an acknowledgement of paternity on January 18, 1994, with 2 witnesses and a notary present. He wrote that he had never once considered me anything but his child. Then came the part that changed the air. Lydia, Jonah read, if you are hearing this, it means you chose cruelty at the one place where decent people bring silence. I knew you would. You collected medical files in July. You called Drayton Labs on August 3 at 2:14 p.m. You asked Chase to pull old payroll records from the Augusta store on September 9. You believed grief would make Mara weak. Jonah paused. Grief made her precise. I looked at Lydia. Her face had gone pale under the foundation. My father had owned Bennett Supply and Hardware, 4 stores spread across Greenville, Spartanburg, Easley, and Anderson. He built the first one with $12,000, a borrowed panel truck, and a belief that the right hinge could save a door and the right apology could save a marriage. Every Saturday when I was little, he took me to the stores and let me count drill bits in blue plastic trays while he walked the aisles asking contractors about their knees, their roofs, their kids. This is my daughter Mara, he would say. She can spot a missing invoice faster than most men can find their truck keys. He was proud of that. I became a forensic bookkeeper because of him. Numbers made sense when people didn't. Numbers did not flatter, manipulate, or cry on command. They sat quietly until someone cared enough to read them. Lydia never liked that about me. When she married my father 8 years earlier, she came with a diamond tennis bracelet, a wounded story about a bad first husband, and Chase, who was 22 and already allergic to work. At first, she called me sweetheart and said she hoped we could be close. Within 6 months, my mother's photographs had migrated from the living room to the hallway. Within a year, Chase had an office at the main store, despite not knowing the difference between a carriage bolt and a lag screw. Dad noticed more than Lydia thought. He always did. The letter ended at the graveside with instructions. Jonah was to read the paternity acknowledgement aloud. He was to give me a red binder locked in his office safe. He was to remind Lydia that the stores had been transferred into the Bennett Family Operating Trust 11 months earlier, with me as successor trustee and chief operating officer. Lydia would receive the lake house and the exact spousal settlement she signed for in the prenuptial agreement. Chase would receive nothing. Not because Dad hated him, because Dad had already paid for 2 failed businesses, 1 luxury truck, and $31,000 of consulting advances that never produced a single report. My father believed in second chances, but he also believed a third chance should come with receipts. At the grave, Lydia folded her folder shut. You can't humiliate me like this, she whispered. Jonah looked at the coffin, then back at her. I didn't. That was the first time I saw fear on her face. Not much, just enough. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought my father's letter had cut the wire before the bomb went off, and all I had to do was survive the burial, go home, and learn how to live in a world where he didn't call me every Sunday at 7. I thought Lydia would retreat into the lake house with her pearls and her anger. I underestimated hunger. 3 days after the funeral, a courier arrived at the Anderson store while I was reviewing inventory shrinkage reports under fluorescent lights that buzzed like trapped insects. The package smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and copier toner. Inside was a petition filed in Greenville County Probate Court, requesting emergency suspension of my authority over the trust. Lydia claimed I had exerted undue influence over my dying father. Chase claimed I had altered business records to steal ownership. Together, they claimed Dad had been mentally incompetent for the last 14 months of his life, which was interesting because Chase had asked him for money 11 times during that exact period and always described him in emails as sharp as ever. I did not throw the petition across the office. I made coffee. Bad coffee, burned at the bottom of the pot because the Anderson manager never cleaned the machine, and I drank it black while the rain ticked against the warehouse windows. Then, I unlocked the bottom drawer of my father's desk. Inside was the red binder Jonah had delivered that morning, 2 external drives, and a note on yellow legal paper. Mara, Don't answer noise with noise. Audit it. Love, Dad. I sat down. The first tab was labeled Lydia. The second was labeled Chase. The third was labeled Trust. The fourth was labeled If They Get Stupid. That last one almost made me laugh. Almost. Inside were bank statements, vendor contracts, email printouts, security stills, insurance documents, phone logs, and a copy of a handwritten memo from Dad dated April 12. He had noticed irregularities in the books 7 months before he died. I had noticed some of them too, but grief and hospital appointments had blurred the edges. Dad had not been blurred at all. For the next 12 nights, I became what he had trained me to be. A wall. I worked after the stores closed, after the forklifts went quiet, after the last customer with paint on his jeans drove away. I wore an old green parka over my work clothes because the warehouse heater coughed more than it warmed. The concrete smelled of sawdust, motor oil, and wet cardboard. Every few minutes, the motion lights clicked off and left me in half darkness until I waved one hand over my head like a tired ghost. The numbers spoke. They told me Chase had created a vendor called Blue Ridge Logistics, LLC, 4 months after Lydia married Dad. The address was a mailbox in Simpsonville. The invoices were round numbers, always just under the threshold that required Dad's second signature. $9,850 for freight optimization, $9,400 for emergency route consulting, $8,775 for inventory relocation analysis. No shipping documents, no route plans, no deliverables, just money moving out of Bennett Supply and into an account Chase controlled. The numbers kept talking. They told me Lydia had charged $42,681.19 in community relations expenses to the company card, including spa treatments, cashmere sweaters, a private country club luncheon, and a black Chanel suit purchased 48 hours before my father's funeral. They told me someone had used my employee credentials from IP address 73.46.118.209 to download payroll files at 1:07 a.m. on September 9. They told me that same IP address belonged to the lake house. Then the numbers screamed. Under the tab, If They Get Stupid, Dad had placed a copy of an IRS notice about unpaid payroll taxes from a quarter I knew we had paid. The notice had confused him because our internal ledger showed the payment cleared. But the bank trace in the binder showed something else. The payroll tax transfer for $118,204.33 had been canceled online 6 minutes after approval, then rerouted the next morning through an account tied to Blue Ridge Logistics. Dad had flagged it. Chase had stolen federal payroll tax money. Lydia had signed the supporting vendor certification. That changed everything. Family court is ugly. Probate court is expensive. Federal tax fraud is neither. Federal tax fraud is a hammer looking for a nail. I called Jonah at 6:18 the next morning. He answered on the second ring. You found it. I found enough. Did you make copies? 3. 1 in the office safe, 1 with me, 1 uploaded to the encrypted archive Dad set up. Jonah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, He hoped you wouldn't need that. So did I. By 9:30 a.m., we were sitting in a conference room that smelled like lemon furniture polish and old paper. Jonah's paralegal, Denise, scanned documents with the speed of someone who had seen rich families behave badly for 30 years and had lost all capacity for surprise. Every page went into evidence folders. Every file was time-stamped. Every digital log was hashed and copied. Jonah called a tax attorney named Rebecca Lowell. Rebecca called a former IRS criminal investigation agent who now worked private cases. The former agent looked at the first 20 pages and said, Don't let them know you know. So I didn't. When Lydia called that afternoon, I answered on speaker with Jonah recording from his end because South Carolina law permitted one-party consent and Jonah liked clean evidence. Mara, Lydia said, sweet as antifreeze, we don't need to destroy each other. You filed an emergency petition. Only because you forced my hand. Elliot was confused. Everyone knows it. The store office smelled like printer heat and dust. I watched a receipt curl out of the old Epson by the desk. My hand rested on the red binder, flat and still. "What do you want, Lydia?" "A reasonable settlement. You resign as trustee. Chase takes operational control. You receive $200,000 and sign a non-disparagement agreement." $200,000. For 4 stores worth $6.8 million, 76 employees, and the legacy of the man who taught me how to count washers before I could spell inventory. I let 3 seconds pass. "Send it in writing," I said. She was so pleased she forgot to sound sad. "I knew you would come around." I did not come around. I stepped aside. That is not the same thing. For 2 weeks, I played smaller than I was. I asked for extensions. I replied to emails with phrases like, "I am considering all options," and "I hope we can avoid further pain." At the Anderson store, I let Chase walk through the aisles with a clipboard he held upside down for 12 full minutes before one of the cashiers texted me a photo. He told employees he would be modernizing the company culture. He used the word synergy twice near the plumbing aisle. I smiled when necessary. I documented everything. Chase got bolder. He requested administrator access to the accounting system for transition planning. Jonah advised me to grant read-only access through a monitored account. Chase logged in from the lake house at 11:42 p.m., searched for Delete Audit Trail, then downloaded 37 files into a folder named MB Cleanup. MB. My initials. Some criminals are clever. Most are just confident. Lydia got bolder, too. She sent family members messages claiming I had manipulated Dad while he was medicated. She sent Aunt Ruth a photograph of the blood type report with the line about impossibility highlighted in yellow. She told Uncle Martin I had refused to let her grieve in her own home, though she was still living in the lake house with Dad's wine collection, Dad's boat, and Dad's Labrador, Otis, whom she had never liked until she learned purebred dogs photograph well on sympathy posts. Every lie went into the binder. Every lie got a tab. The hearing was scheduled for November 18th at 10 a.m. in Courtroom 4B of Greenville County Probate Court. The morning was cold enough to show breath, and the courthouse lobby smelled of floor wax, damp wool, and burnt coffee from a vending machine nobody should have trusted. I wore black slacks, flat shoes, and my father's old navy scarf. Lydia arrived in camel cashmere, with Chase beside her in a blue suit so tight at the shoulders he looked shrink-wrapped. Behind them came half the family. That was Lydia's choice, not mine. She had told everyone she would restore Elliot's honor in court. She had invited cousins, neighbors, church friends, 2 store managers she thought disliked me, and a local business reporter who had once written about the Bennett Supply anniversary sale. She wanted witnesses. She wanted a stage. People like Lydia always confuse stage lights with sunlight. Jonah and I sat at the respondents' table. The red binder sat between us, clean, plain, and heavy. Beside it was a silver flash drive in a sealed evidence bag. Behind us sat Aunt Ruth, Uncle Martin, Daniel, Denise, and Rebecca Lowell, who had asked to attend quietly. 2 rows behind Lydia sat 2 men in gray suits. They looked like accountants who had learned to carry badges. When Judge Caroline Whitcomb entered, the room stood. Her robe made a soft brushing sound as she took the bench. She was in her 60s, sharp-eyed, with the calm impatience of a woman who could smell nonsense before it introduced itself. Lydia's attorney spoke first. His name was Paul Vickers, and he had the polished voice of a man who charged in 6-minute increments. He described me as emotionally unstable, improperly positioned, and biologically unrelated to the decedent. He said my father had been vulnerable. He said Lydia and Chase only wanted to protect the Bennett legacy. Then he made his first mistake. He submitted the blood type report as Exhibit A. His second mistake came 30 seconds later. He submitted a document allegedly signed by my father 2 months before his death, naming Chase as intended successor to Bennett Supply operations. I watched Jonah's pen stop moving. Judge Whitcomb looked at the signature for a long time. "Mr. Reed?" Jonah stood. "Your Honor, We object to Exhibit B and request permission to voir dire the document foundation. Mr. Vickers frowned. On what basis? Forgery. The courtroom made the smallest possible sound. Not a gasp. Not yet. Just the intake of 40 people realizing the floor had shifted. Judge Whitcomb looked over her glasses. Mr. Reed, that is a serious allegation. Yes, Your Honor. Do you have support? Jonah touched the red binder. Extensive support. Lydia leaned toward her attorney and whispered sharply. Chase stared at the binder. I watched his throat move. Good. Jonah began with the calm of a surgeon laying out instruments. He submitted Dad's notarized paternity acknowledgement from January 18, 1994. He submitted the trust documents executed 11 months before death, with 2 independent medical capacity letters attached. He submitted a recording from June 2nd in which Dad, clear and irritated, told Jonah he expected Lydia to attack my legitimacy and wanted every legal protection in place. Dad's voice filled the courtroom. If she waits until I am dead, he said through the speaker, make sure my daughter does not have to defend my love like it is a line item. Aunt Ruth began to cry behind me. I did not. I folded my hands. Jonah moved to the alleged successor document. He placed a real signature beside the disputed one. The real Elliot Bennett signed with a slight lift at the end of the double T, a habit from decades of signing delivery receipts too quickly. The disputed signature dragged downward and stopped bluntly. Jonah then submitted security footage from the main office dated September 17th, showing Chase standing over the scanner at 9:38 p.m., feeding blank letterhead through the machine while Lydia held a phone flashlight over the desk. Chase muttered, "That's not what it looks like." Judge Whitcomb looked at him. "You are not speaking right now." He stopped speaking. Jonah submitted the login records. IP address 73.46.118.209, Lake House router. My credentials used without authorization. Payroll files downloaded. Metadata from Exhibit B showing the document had been created on Lydia's personal laptop at 10:14 p.m. on September 17th. Not by my father 2 months before his death. Mr. Vickers stopped looking polished. Then Rebecca stood. Your Honor, she said. With the court's permission, I represent Bennett Supply and Hardware in a related tax matter. Several filings submitted by the petitioners appear to overlap with a federal payroll tax diversion currently under review. The 2 men in gray suits stood too. The courtroom changed temperature. One of them opened a leather credential case. Special Agent Harris, IRS Criminal Investigation. This court has been provided a courtesy notice under seal. Lydia's face emptied. I had seen her angry, smug, wounded, charming, and falsely fragile. I had never seen her blank. It was like watching a chandelier go dark. Special Agent Harris did not make a speech. Federal agents rarely need to. He confirmed that Blue Ridge Logistics, LLC had received $118,204.33, originally designated for payroll tax remittance. He confirmed subsequent transfers totaling $64,900 to accounts controlled by Chase Bennett. He confirmed Lydia Bennett had signed vendor certifications under penalty of perjury. Then he said the quietest sentence in the room. Additional charges are anticipated. Chase stood halfway up. Mom said it was a loan. Lydia turned on him so fast her pearls clicked against each other. Sit down, she hissed. The court reporter's keys tapped steadily. Click, click, click. The HVAC system rattled overhead. Somewhere in the hallway, a deputy's radio chirped and then went quiet. Judge Whitcomb removed her glasses. Mrs. Bennett, she said, did you file this petition knowing Exhibit B was not authentic? Lydia opened her mouth. No sound came out. Did you accuse Ms. Bennett of exploiting a vulnerable adult while possessing evidence that Mr. Bennett had executed trust documents, capacity letters, and a paternity acknowledgement years before this dispute? Still nothing. Did you invite family members and business associates to this hearing for the purpose of publicly discrediting her? Lydia's attorney touched her sleeve. She shook him off. "She isn't his blood," Lydia whispered. For the first time that morning, I spoke. My voice was calm enough to surprise even me. "No, Lydia, I am his daughter." 4 words. That was all she got. Judge Whitcomb denied the emergency petition with prejudice. She affirmed my authority as successor trustee, pending final probate administration. She referred the forged document and false statements to the solicitor's office. Then she looked directly at Lydia and Chase. "Do not contact Ms. Bennett except through counsel. Do not access Bennett Supply Systems. Do not enter any company premises. Violate this order, and you will leave my courtroom differently than you entered it." Chase sat down hard. Lydia did not move. The hearing could have ended there. It almost did. Then, Agent Harris walked to their table with a deputy beside him. He spoke quietly to Chase first, then to Lydia. I did not hear every word, only fragments. Federal warrant, financial records, counsel, voluntary surrender. But I heard the handcuffs. Click. Then click again, a sound like a period at the end of a long, ugly sentence. Lydia looked back at the gallery as if searching for sympathy. Aunt Ruth looked at the floor. Uncle Martin looked out the window. The store managers looked at me. Chase's face had collapsed into the stunned softness of a man who had never believed consequences applied to people with good hair and expensive shoes. The business reporter did not take a photograph. He just wrote. Outside the courthouse, the sky had turned a hard winter blue. The wind smelled like exhaust, wet leaves, and coffee from the cart on the corner. Jonah stood beside me on the courthouse steps while people filtered past in small, embarrassed groups. Nobody knew what to say after watching a family lie turn into a federal case. Aunt Ruth hugged me carefully, as if grief had made me breakable. "You were so calm," she whispered. "No," I said. "I was prepared." There is a difference. The fallout did not happen all at once. It came in envelopes, phone calls, amended filings, and quiet resignations. Lydia's country club membership was suspended after the board learned she had charged 3 club luncheons to Bennett Supply under vendor development. Chase's truck was repossessed in the parking lot of a steakhouse in Malden. Blue Ridge Logistics disappeared from the state business registry, but not from federal evidence. In January, Chase took a plea agreement for wire fraud and tax-related charges. He received 18 months in federal prison and was ordered to pay restitution. Lydia fought longer because Lydia believed surrender was something other people did. She sold the lake house to pay attorneys, lost most of the spousal settlement to judgments, and eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy and making false statements. At sentencing, she finally looked at me. The courtroom smelled the same as before. Wax, wool, old coffee. Her hair was less perfect. Her pearls were gone. She held a tissue in one hand and a folded statement in the other. "I was afraid of being left with nothing," she said, "so I tried to take what was never mine." It was not enough, but it was true. The judge gave her 30 months. Not forever, just enough time to learn that a locked door does not care how expensive your coat used to be. Bennett Supply survived. That mattered more than revenge. The first month was brutal. Vendors called nervously. Employees watched me for signs of collapse. Customers came in with condolences and awkward casseroles. I found Dad's handwriting everywhere. Notes on purchase orders, jokes in margins, reminders taped to the old register at the Greenville store. Replace the squeaky hinge in aisle 7. Call Mrs. Penley about storm windows. Tell Mara the Anderson numbers look funny. Even dead, he was still auditing. By spring, the store steadied. We hired a real logistics manager, promoted 2 assistant managers, and converted Chase's office into an employee training room. I hung my mother's photograph back in the main store lobby beside Dad's. Not hidden in a hallway, not softened for someone else's comfort. Right where it belonged. On the first Saturday in April, I opened the Greenville store at 6:30 a.m. by myself. The air smelled of lumber, fertilizer, and fresh coffee from the machine I finally replaced. The automatic doors hummed awake. Sunlight moved across the aisles, touching rows of paint cans, copper fittings, garden gloves, and brass hinges. Otis, Dad's Labrador, slept behind the counter because Lydia had surrendered him through her attorney, and he had decided the store was better than the lake house. A little boy came in with his grandfather looking for screws to fix a red wagon. I walked them to aisle 4. The boy asked if I owned the place. I thought about the grave, the letter, the binder, the court, the click of handcuffs. I thought about my father telling every customer that I was his daughter, as if the words themselves could build a roof over me. "Yes," I said. "My dad left it in good hands." The grandfather smiled. Then he was a smart man. He was. That evening, after closing, I drove back to Magnolia Rest. The cemetery grass had grown green again. Someone had cleaned the mud from around Dad's headstone. The roses were gone, thank God, replaced by the small tin of mixed screws I had left there the week before, because Dad would have found that funnier than flowers. I sat beside him until the light faded. "I kept it standing," I said. The wind moved through the cedar tree. Somewhere far off, a truck backed up with 3 soft beeps. The world kept making its ordinary sounds, which felt cruel at first, and then, slowly, merciful. People will tell you blood is everything, because blood is easy to measure. They can put it in a vial, type it, label it, and use it like a weapon when love refuses to obey them. But family is not proved by a lab report. Family is proved by who shows up, who stays, who protects you when you cannot protect yourself, and who leaves instructions in a red binder because they know evil prefers an audience. My father chose me. I chose his legacy. Lydia thought she could erase me at his grave. Chase thought a forged signature could replace a lifetime. They both believed inheritance was about blood, money, and volume. They were wrong. Inheritance is responsibility. If you have ever been told you do not belong by someone who needed you small, remember this: you do not have to scream to be heard. Sometimes all you need is the truth, organized in the right order, placed on the right table, at the exact right time. And when the room finally goes silent, let the evidence speak. If this story touched you, comment your age and where you are watching from. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about family betrayal, quiet strength, and the kind of justice that arrives with documents, witnesses, and perfect timing.